2 months of work down the drain because I decided to make a monster instead of a table. The design was seriously flawed, but we needed a new table. The old one was drabby. To go along with some drabby chairs, it wasn't my best work, but it did last. So my wife found an awesome Facebook market deal. 6 chairs for $100. Each one of them should have cost $600. Obviously, we needed a new table, and I had to do it on a budget. Spoiler alert, didn't happen. For inspiration, we headed over to ChatGPT, where else? And we got a design that was awesome looking, it was flawless, at least on paper. In practice, it was a trestle built for a castle, not a small 6-person table. With absolutely zero foresight, I fired up Fusion 360 and went all in on this grand trestle design. What I came up with was way beyond my skill level, so my only shot was some tricky Fusion 360 modeling and putting my 6090 CNC to work. I'll make a link to that and all the other tools I used in the description. My Chinese CNC wasn't built for something this massive. The only way to make it work was to chop it into sections using Fusion's split body tool, which I used way more than I care to admit, and I've also made a video showing how to use it. Since I was trying to keep this on a budget, I obviously went with Home Depot's finest 3/4 inch pine. And it worked, but I still didn't realize what I was actually building. It wasn't a table yet, it was a catastrophe in the making. So I kept going. The whole thing had to line up. So I added some dowel holes throughout the foot. When I was ready to make it and cut it on the CNC, everything would line up perfectly during assembly. The trestle part came with its own issues. I 3D carved each piece on the CNC and then aligned them up, then stacked them together and glued them to a 4x4 post in the center. Once I started gluing everything up, that's when it really hit me. This thing was a disaster. There was no place for your feet, it was uncomfortable, and there's no reason that something this big should be in a room that small. Hundreds of dollars and months of work gone. Lesson learned, always test proportions before you actually start building. Whether you're just using some blue painter's tape, a tape measure, or cardboard, do yourself a favor and make sure it fits before you start building. After doing all that work, I was dreading making a new one. Redoing the design, cutting everything out on the CNC. So I tried to take a shortcut. I decided to make the foot a lot smaller, and I was going to try to make most of the foot from a 4x4 post. Luckily, I caught it early and realized that this foot was going to be way too small, and my kids climbing on top of the table was just going to topple over the table. And the next design had to be the last. I had to make sure I had it done right. Luckily, I learned a ton from the first 2 failures. So I started working on the third design and hopefully the final design. This design had to be slimmer, but it also had to be sturdy enough to make sure it wouldn't topple over when a couple of boys decide to climb on top of it. Pine doesn't give you the weight you need for something like this, so I had to put my unused engineering degree to the task. I had to figure out how wide the legs needed to be and how heavy the table assembly had to be so that a couple toddlers climbing on the edge of it wouldn't tip it over. Without anything extra, I was way too light. Pine seemed like it wasn't gonna work, but I was determined to make this thing as cheap as possible. Yes, it's a character flaw. So then it dawned on me. I could either make the legs wider, which would make the table less comfortable and uglier, or I could add weight to the legs. Steel blanks from an old business of making yoga mat holders, I'd bend these into hooks. And I'm not doing it anymore, so I decided to use all these blanks and hide them into the feet so that I could have a heavier base and the boys wouldn't ruin my day. I added these steel planks into the base and also the runner that goes between the 2 feet. Since I was pretty confident in this design, just like the last one, I went ahead and I cut everything out preemptively. I also tried cutting the miters on the CNC, which, let's just say, I'll never do that again. I should have just cut them on the table saw. It ripped the edges, but I just ran with it because I really didn't want to redo this again. So I assembled everything, I added the steel bars and was able to hide them in nicely into the feet. Once again, trying to make it cheap, I cut a few pieces of plywood to the size of the table I wanted. With the legs finished and a couple of pieces of plywood cut for our tabletop, I started getting sloppy and the garage became just as bad. The only thing left was to figure out a way to secure the trestle posts to the tabletop. And for this, I don't like using threaded inserts, especially not in cheap Home Depot pine. So I went with T-nuts instead. They have the teeth and they'll bite right into the wood without twisting and can't pull through. So I embedded these in between the 2 layers of plywood. And while I was there, I added some in for a future leaf my wife thinks we might need if my kids figure out how to be more socially acceptable than I am. And boom, I glued it together. I clamped it. I had to add a ton of weight to the center to make sure that the glue squeezed nicely. Then I clamped on some edge banding and trimmed it. I did a couple solid coats of polyacrylic on the top, let it dry, and that was basically it. There are a couple things I'm really not happy with, like the 2 different colors on the post, and I really wanted to paint it. I thought it would look much nicer, but my wife said no, so we went with it. Now it's time to get it from the garage inside the house. So I disassembled all the table, took out all the chairs, and then just like every man, I decided to carry it in myself. Even though finding someone to help would have made it way safer and a lot easier. So I got our bargain chairs in, I put up my feet, and I called it a day. If you enjoyed this or you learned anything at all, make sure you like the video and subscribe. I'll see you for the next build.